Hello, and welcome to this talk on historical maps and layers of London. My name is Matthew Davies. I'm a trustee of the Historic Towns Trust and also director of a project called Layers of London. And what I want to focus on in this talk are the ways in which we can use online digital tools and methods to look at the history of towns and cities using some of the maps that the Historic Towns Trust has created and published. The Historic Towns Trust researches and publishes atlases for some of the UK's major historic towns. And in recent years, we've also published folding sheet maps of some of these towns and cities. And for London, we actually have two maps, both of which have proved to be very popular. One of them covers the city of London as it was in the medieval period around 1300. The other focuses on the Tudor period, showing London as it was in about 1520. And maps like these are extremely helpful in understanding the development of towns and cities. And what we wanted to do at the Trust was to find other ways to make them useful by putting them online and allowing people to browse and explore them. The Trust has recently collaborated with a project called Layers of London, which is based at the Institute of Historical Research. And Layers of London has a huge collection of online maps of different kinds, some covering the whole of London, others covering smaller areas such as parishes or estates. And we've worked with lots of partners, including the British Library, the National Archives, Historic England, and many borough archives right across London. And what makes Layers of London a bit different is not just that we have so many maps, but we also have content that's been contributed by the public. More than 12,000 records have been uploaded by people in groups working on the history of London and its people and places. So it's a real community effort to uncover and share the history of London. As I said, we have lots of maps, and this is the Layers of London library page, so to speak, and you can see on the top row the two historic towns maps for medieval and Tudor London. And you can select and explore as many as you like. You can also search the underlying modern map for place names, and you can search and browse the thousands of contributions from the public to find information about a particular place or indeed about a particular person as well. And one of the ways in which you can use the maps on Layers of London is to look at how the city has changed over the centuries by overlaying maps on top of each other and then peeling back those layers. And here you can see a smaller area of London to the north of Holborn and just to the west of the city, as it was in 1682 when William Morgan published one of the earliest accurately surveyed maps of London. As you can see, it was very much on the edge of the city, and you can see open fields to the north as well as more formal gardens and open spaces such as Red Lion Fields right in the centre of the screen. A century later, we can see in Richard Horwood's map how the 18th century building boom had led to the rapid development of what we now call Bloomsbury, with lots of houses and squares, and Red Lion Fields is now a square surrounded by rows of houses. Over on the left-hand side, incidentally, you can see Bedford House, which was the London seat of the Dukes of Bedford, who owned and developed much of the land in this area. A century later, at the end of the 19th century, Charles Booth compiled his poverty map with colour coding for different levels of wealth. And you can see here the same area of Bloomsbury, where the red colours denote the better off and the dark blues and blacks the poorer and often, in his view, the more dangerous elements of society. Layers of London also contains other one-off map layers. Here, for example, is part of an aerial photographic layer from the late 1940s, which shows the area around St Paul's Cathedral, which was badly damaged by bombing. But you can see the damage much better on the purpose-made bomb damage map, which was compiled after the war. And here you can see the purple areas around the cathedral, which miraculously escaped unscathed in purple. Returning to the historic towns maps, there are several ways in which you can use them. First, you can use the maps to provide background and context to the records that our contributors have uploaded to see what London looked like in a particular period rather than just using a modern map as a background. This is the Tudor London map, for example, which is exactly the same as the paper version, but in this case has been digitised and put on Layers of London. And here it is again. this time with all the records that Layers of London users and partners have added, and each of these records has some text and often an image attached to it. And if we take one of these pins, these contributions, this is about a property belonging to the Clothworkers Company. And you can zoom into the map on the right-hand side and then see on the left-hand side the record itself, which includes a contemporary plan of a particular property drawn by Ralph Treswell. And you can do the same for the hundreds of other records concerning people and buildings. I'll just show one other example. This time it's a record of an archaeological site in the City of London, which provides us with some information about the Great Fire of 1666, because in this case burnt artefacts of different kinds, including glass and ceramics, were found in a well that served a property in Philpot Lane. So again, there are hundreds more similar records that you can overlay onto the medieval and Tudor London maps to give even more of an insight into everyday life in those periods. Another way to use the historic towns maps is to combine them with other kinds of information and data. For example, Museum of London Archaeology has a huge amount of data about London's Roman and early medieval fabric. And in this case, we can overlay information about Roman London, particularly the street plan, onto the medieval map. And we can see, for example, that some of the medieval streets, particularly those running west to east, largely follow the Roman street pattern, while others did not. We can also see the locations of the Roman fort to the top left and the amphitheatre, which is now underneath Guildhall Yard. As we saw with Bloomsbury, Layers of London allows you to explore how London developed over time. We do not, of course, have contemporary maps of medieval or early Tudor London, so the historic town's reconstructions are extremely valuable and based on a huge amount of documentary and archaeological research. Here, for example, you can see the area around Cornhill in the City of London with the early parish churches and the street pattern, which is well established by about 1300. Jumping forward to the early 16th century, we can now use the Tudor map to see how the City of London's institutions and infrastructure had developed over the intervening period. And we can see livery company halls and almshouses such as those here of the Merchant Taylors Company. We can see conduits which were used by the citizens to access fresh water piped in from the west of the city. And in this case here, Leadenhall Market, which was redeveloped as a market, a granary, and even a school by the Mayor of London, a man called Simon Eyre, in the early 15th century. Now, written evidence is always helpful when trying to understand and use maps. And here's an example from John Stow's famous Survey of London, in which he paints a rather nostalgic picture of a road called Hog Lane to the east of the City of London, evoking its rural character before the developers came in the late 16th century. He talks about fair hedgerows of elm trees with bridges and easy stiles to pass over into the pleasant fields, very commodious for citizens therein to walk, shoot, and otherwise to recreate and refresh their dulled spirits in the sweet and wholesome air. Very evocative picture being depicted here. And we can see what Stowe was talking about in these maps. On the left, again, is Tudor London, showing Hog Lane running northwest from what is now Aldgate High Street. And from the same period, we can see one of the earliest maps or views of London, the so-called Agus map from the 1560s. And we can really see in that view the rural character of the area outside the city wall, as it was when John Stowe was growing up. Incidentally, Hog Lane still survives, but it's gone through two name changes since then. It's now called Middlesex Street, but from the mid-17th century until the early 19th century, it was more famously called Petticoat Lane, the location of a well-known market that still takes place today. And this brings me to the end of my talk. I hope you'll take a moment to explore the Layers of London website and particularly the two Historic Towns Trust maps of London, and maybe be inspired to add your own material to the website as well. I'll leave you now with two web addresses where you can find out more information about the Historic Towns Trust and the Layers of London project. But in the meantime, thank you for watching and listening to this.